Well, welcome everyone to our April 22nd, 2024, 9 o'clock strategic planning meeting. I am going to have for the record, we have two commissioners that are present, Commissioner Kearns and myself. Yes.
Data.
You're finding out that the other commissioners will not be present today. One is traveling for county business. I think both Commissioner French has county business that he is doing, and Commissioner Jordan may join at some point. I'm just not sure. So, but with that, we will not be able to take any action, which we don't anticipate us taking any action, and there will be no executive sessions since there is not a quorum. And then, was I supposed to state anything else for the record?
I think that probably covers us for now.
Very good. We will still continue to record this, and we'll be live here this morning, and we will just move forward.
Just kind of like an exhibition meeting. It doesn't really count.
Pre-season.
Yeah, pre-season. It doesn't really count, but it keeps us on our game.
Exactly. So with that, then I'm going to go ahead and start with Gil.
Good morning, commissioners. I'm here this morning to go over the audit findings from our investment grade audit that we started in right about October of last year. Up until now, and give you an idea of the directions. These are just the recommendations that we've uncovered during this audit, and give you kind of a high level view of some of the stuff that we actually found. Next slide. Again, this is where we are with the project. We're going to provide a detailed audit of utility power usage on all county buildings over 50,000 square feet that fall under House Bill 1257 requirements. Provide a plan outline of changes the county can make that will allow us to meet our EUI, which is energy usage intensity targets. Register our buildings and portfolio with the Department of Commerce Energy Program. We have already done that. We've already taken our numbers that we have, and we've already registered. Discuss alternatives for replacing fossil fuel technology. Review the new project scope and priorities with the BOCC. Centralized versus decentralized. Discuss alternates to value engineer added solutions that save energy. These are measures that we've already started. We've been working on these for 5 years. That's why we wanted to get everything registered in, because everything that we do that saves energy moving forward will reflect in our billing. Timeline to complete House Bill 1257. I have a date wrong on this. The June 27 is for the juvenile detention and the public works. The June of 28, that's supposed to be June of 26, is for the courthouse, the adult detention building, and the public safety building. So I do have a mistake on that. So we are still in discussions with the Department of Commerce. And there is a little bit of leeway on that as long as we have built the plan and we're moving forward. And then discuss the FIMs. That'll be last. These are really the facility improvement measures. So move to the next slide.
And I'm just going to ask, so as we do that, I mean, everybody is facing the same thing. I really feel like, especially our universities are going to be.
Yeah.
I mean,
they are the only thing where we're different than they are is one, they made a change. Commerce made a change during our investigation into our audit, and they skewed the energy numbers a little bit based upon the operation within the building and the hours of operation. So those had to be calculated in. And where we fall short, our campus as a whole is fairly efficient. It's just the public safety building and then the adult detention building. The adult detention building, where we are with that facility, if we want to compare it, it's like a Stanley Cup. It's just got a really great thermal properties, but the actual properties within the building It's the amount of energy it takes to keep those environmentally friendly.
Okay,
So, you know, for the engineering design of the building was for a maximum capacity of 460 inmates. And we've got an extra third, so we're generating that much more energy to actually keep the temperature control, the amount of water usage, the electrical. So it actually rates at a very high scale. So to bring that down, our approach was to get the whole campus together. Since we are on one solid master meter, our calculations, we were able to do like a collective calculation on that. And will speak to how we were able to get the whole campus to hit its CUI target. So, go ahead.
thank you.
Oh, so to go on, options not recommended due to engineering limitations and costs. Geothermal, and you'll find that with a lot of these, we just don't have the real estate. And to really give you an idea, you know, geothermal requires 800,000 square feet of land to install geothermal wells. That's what we only have. If we took parking lot A, we would only have 50,000. So that kind of gives you an idea how large that is, and you'll get a view on that on the next slide. But the electrical resistance upgrades they're not feasible due to the utility supplier. So we had to go to a Vista on this one. And right now we are using 2.6 megawatts here at our county campus facility. We actually would need 7 megawatts. So they would have to bring in some really heavy duty infrastructure for us to pull off any type of an electrical type system. Heat pumps the same, works with geothermal and air source. We would need a lot of space and a lot of energy for the heat pumps. And solar, same space. We just don't have it on that line. So if you look at the next slide. So on the geothermal, the existing load, kind of like we said, so right now we're at 24 million MBTU or 24 million BTU, or 2,000 tons at 717 horsepower. So electric heat pumps required for this. So for the heat sinks on geothermal, so that space that I was talking about. So our parking lot A is it's equal to 1 football field. We would need 14 in order to actually pull off geothermal or heat pump technology. So supplemental heat capacity to meet peak heat design loads. Right now, again, we're at 2.7 megawatts and we would need to get to 7.22. Where we are with this, so that would be an actual 278% increase in the electrical demand and cost. So as we talk about this and not knowing where the future is on some of these utilities, but right now we're at $7.22 MBTU an hour. And if we were to go strictly electric, it would be 28.97. So right now, even if we had that capacity, the price to actually run this facility would drastically increase by at least 278%. Next slide. So I wanted to give you kind of an idea. These are our buildings and our square footages and where we're currently at, where our targets are. So if you look at that chart to the left and you look at the buildings that we have, you'll look at the square footages. These are square footages that we have to register as part of the Green Buildings Act. And you'll see that the existing energy use index that's there, those are how they are calculated today. That's the amount of energy that they consume. So that's how we have to rate those. And the ratings changed during this process. And one of the things that happened to us is we considered right off when we started this project, public safety building has an incarceration facility. So we rated the building as that, but we're not allowed to do that. So we had to, as a police station and these other gathering areas, the rating had to come down. So we only had a small percentage of that we could actually capture. So it kind of changed our rating. So that's why you'll see the public safety building, our existing is at 137. And then for the jail, it's 155. So in order to hit those targets and get us as a collaborative, we calculated it at about 92 as our EUI target. So by bringing those together, we were able to do that. We were actually able to hit that mark. But these are the reductions that we need to see in order to do that. So go to the,
Just trying to make sure I understand
Yep.
this. Sorry.
That's okay. So you,
Okay,
so,
very good.
yeah, so you take the building, so you take the building and what it's used for,
Okay, so-
and they,
And then well, just here, so we got the square footage.
Yep.
And then what is the next column?
that's the existing energy use index. So that's what's going on right now.
That's what's happening right now.
Yep.
And then the next one is what the target we need to get. to?
That's the target we need to hit.
Okay.
Yep.
And so then our reduction, that,
Yep. And then those are the reductions.
and you have,
They-
so here we're looking at them each individually,
Yes,
and then you're wanting to look at it collectively.
yes. So if we do it collective, well, the jail itself, that's the building right now that we're not gonna be able to hit that unless we do this. We're very close. You'll see, we're just hitting that using this collaborative so we can get to 92. We're still at the target on that. Even if we showed this reduction, we still haven't met that target amount.
So would it be worth it for us to go back to the legislature, because every jail is gonna have this situation? All the jails were built back in the early 80s.
Yeah,
when the state came and provided funding.
Yeah, so which county was it we discussed this with?
Snohomish.
Snohomish. So I don't know the exact age of their jail, but they are able to actually meet that EUI standard. We don't know the details of that if they are on their own.
They weren't over capacity. They're a third under
Right.
capacity. We're a third over capacity. So
Right.
think about the body heat alone from a
Yes.
third over capacity and us having to bring those temperatures down in the summer.
Yeah.
Much different scenario, but they were built about the same time. as us.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that's where it's the capacity side of it.
Do we know where King, we'd have to figure out where King is at.
We only had the one group showed up at our last meeting because that was one of the questions that we really wanted to find out how other counties how they're doing this.
Okay.
So, and whether they're on a master meter for the entire campus or whether they're actually independent of
Okay.
each other.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
I may ask some questions
oh, that,
in
yes,
the board meeting
Yeah.
with Wasac, so,
yep.
yeah.
Yeah, and in the way that is calculated and the way that they're rated, we have that information and we can share that. Next slide. So when we first started out, we presented this, we did some preliminary calculations and we were steering more towards decentralizing. Just so we could get a really good idea on, we could separate each building, put its own individual plant in, and then we would be able to monitor that usage per plant. That way as we did that, it would bring in the new infrastructure, take us off of the collaborative master meter. But we found out during the pricing of this, that didn't make a lot of sense since we already had a centralized plant. So it was the construction side of it that we would need to do to modify these buildings in order to do that. Just didn't make it, this was a much better option to stay with the centralized. So what we came up with is we came up with centralized hydronic. So a lot of our systems that we presently have are hydronic already. They use steam through a heat exchanger to actually heat the hydronics. So that is the way that a lot of these facilities are running right now. So it would be easier for us to continue maintaining the same facility and then pumping that out. One of the main reasons too that we went this direction is that our plant is really capable of dual sourcing our utility. So if we have an emergency where we don't have natural gas, we can still run off our diesel systems, our oil systems. So we have dual fuel capabilities at our centralized plant. We would be losing that by going to decentralized unless we plan for a larger area within inside the building. So we know that with the plan of the centralized hydronic, it'll meet the requirements of House Bill 1257, reduction in energy consumption and savings, reduction in greenhouse gases, replace outdated equipment that has passed its life expectancy, reliability of new equipment for the future. Now, this was one of by looking at centralized hydronics within our facility, that even though we continue down the road with the dual fuel and centralized systems, it doesn't mean that later down the road, this system becomes obsolete in the way that it feeds the buildings. We could always later down the road, if they decided to ban fossil fuels or something of that nature, we'd have the capability to actually just change the plant and not the entire county campus. So it gives us that flexibility. Also gives us the ability to diversify our mechanical workforce. We would merge the first class operators with the building mechanics. So they'd be one. Okay, so next slide. This gives you an idea on the left. That is our existing route that is using our tunnel systems and pathways. And if you look at the system on the right, we would be supplying not only the heating hot water from our facility at the central steam plant, but also the hot water for the county. We would put it all on one system. So it would be almost virtually the same pathway with a few modifications. Then we would have to change a direction, one direction in the tunnel, and then we would have to build a smaller vault system to bring that new piping into the public works building. But the cost of that was way less expensive than centralizing or decentralizing and putting individual plants in each one of the buildings. So that gives you kind of the layout. And then if you look at the next slide, these are the pros and cons for the EUI option pros. This is the best option that we found to meet the EUI standard. It improves the central plant's reliability, decreases downtime potential, saves about 6 million to 10 million over the 20-year span, and that's depending on energy costs. Avoids repeat State Clean Buildings Act. So even if we move forward this process, if we move forward with our project, it continually monitors our facilities real time. So we send that information to the state. If we don't, we have to repeat the entire audit in 5 years all over again. So and build another plan and go through all the numbers and share those findings with the state. Provides a means to track and report energy usage to the state. That's again, the system that we selected in this really monitors our buildings real time. So we'll have the ability, if we have a building that's having a potential energy issue, we can put limits and targets on those buildings. So we can say, we'll know that there's something going on. So we'll be able to investigate, figure it out, and actually figure out where the extra energy is coming from. And then demonstrate wise facility stewardship. So the side on ours, the cons, is the cost. So if we can get to that. So the next two slides, the final two. We took a look at this and we're actually, this was based on 30 when I put this out, but we'd found out on Thursday afternoon that the guys are at about 60%. And these numbers really haven't changed. They're pretty shored up. So right now our campus EUI target as a combined is 92.5. So by actually using option one, which actually it converts our steam plant to hydronic and domestic hot water plant, optimize of Metasys controls and new coil valving for heating systems, because they all have to be replaced. And then heat recovery for the domestic hot water. So in the summertime, when we're running our chiller system, we found an energy model on that the actual water we use for exchange is hot enough to actually heat hot water for the campus. So we're kind of recovering that hot water so it doesn't go to waste. So that is what that cost gets you, 23 to 26 million. And then there's for option two. So we wanted to make absolutely sure that as we went through this, I was gonna say, and then add the future EUI modifications from that gets us down to 89. So it meets our target and exceeds it by a small amount. And then the option two, this one we threw in critical infrastructure upgrades that we found during our project overview. So it does the same, it converts the steam plant, hydronic domestic hot water, optimization of Metasys controls and new coil valving on all the systems, heat recovery for the domestic hot water. This replaces the electrical switchgear replacements for the county courthouse, public safety building, and the adult detention building. And part of that adult detention building is to remove the generator from the basement and actually put it out over where the DEM over in that parking lot area is where that would go. So it would be a completely separate system from that system. And we would have the ability to not only have its own tank reservoir on it, but be able to pull a gas line in on it too. So it's a dual fuel system. So anyway, not only that, there's a lot of things that came out during this audit. And I know I only have 30 minutes on this go around, but it showed us a lot that we have, especially on these switch gears. Two of these switch gears that we have for the public safety building and the adult detention facility are at max capacity. So for us to actually do any expansion, any systems that actually would take energy within inside that building, we're at maximum capacity. So we really couldn't support anything along that line for those electrical systems in those buildings. So if they were to add out or add anything on, this system would not be able to provide that. So these new systems, we actually added extra capacity onto those. So that interior lighting, we have the model for it. We did the audit on it. We know what needs to be done. This would probably be one that would be more along the lines of our best option, in that we would purchase the equipment, work with Avista for the rebating portion of it, and then we would install it with our work order system. We've done we did a model in some offices up in our area, and it's a pretty nice system. They're real energy efficient. Selected air handlers, units that are 45 years plus in age. So we wanted to make sure that the units that actually they're really at the end of their life expectancy, or they're due for some type of mechanical failure we won't be able to find parts for. Those are on this list. And then chiller plant mechanical upgrades. Our chiller plant, something we found on it is we actually our systems that we have are they're efficient. It's when we recirculate the water, we don't have really good control of that. And that's what this would do as part of that. And there would be additional energy savings with that. But you'll see that our campus EUI targeted 92.5. This brings us to 83. So it does give us that extra buffer that we're looking.
For another $10 million.
Yes.
Sorry.
Forgot to mention that. So really, what we were looking for, one, we wanted to brief everyone on the audit. If you have questions, if you have additional questions on any of the, how we did the calculation of the energy targets and how we put this project together, please feel free, reach out. We literally have, we had engineering workshops that we sat through with these with, 150 slides with this information. So we have a lot of information on these numbers. So what we are looking for from this meeting today is really kind of get a feel for direction to move forward. Is how do we, knowing House Bill 1257, we started down the road with Mike on looking at if there was any, directions that we could move as a county to make this more financially doable over time. Are there, other considerations to be looked at? And I think that we've checked every one of those boxes. And this was kind of the best option that we came up with.
So I see Scott's on. Scott, are you available to comment?
Yeah, I'm gonna try my video and see if it works. Is the audio coming through okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So a couple things that I would highlight for the commissioners. The investment is anywhere from high of 26 for option 1 to 36 for option 2, 36 million. Those are funds that the commissioners have not identified yet as to where they would come from. We have in the capital plan, our 6-year capital plan had contemplated about 15 million. Again, that was just planning, not actually identified funding yet. The other two things I'd highlight is the savings potential over 20 years is 6 to 10 million. So we can do the math quickly. We can see there is no ROI on this sort of statutory requirement. The vast majority of the investments needed are to get the public safety building and adult detention into compliance, even though it'll be a blended approach. The public safety building is a joint use facility with the city of Spokane. So we will have to do our best to try to figure out how much of the capital investments are going to be related to city of Spokane versus just the county. And then we'll have to do the same thing on the adult detention building as well. So some fairly significant considerations and some fairly large expenses that we're going to have to contemplate through here.
Okay, thank you. And Randy, did you?
I was just going to make a comment that the EUI savings with option 2 versus option 1, it wasn't to get additional EUI savings. It really is just to replace aging infrastructure. For example, the county courthouse, if that switch gear went down, the courthouse would be out of operation for
Until we've found an emergency plan, could be probably anywhere from 2 to 6 months just to get an emergency plan together. That doesn't get us that replacement.
because it's, how old is it, the switch gear in this building?
Yeah, it was installed in 75. I think the other side of it, it's something that we've identified in our systems. until recently, you know, we put together, we actually bought and installed the Megamation system for how we generate work orders, preventative maintenance. And a lot of these pieces of equipment too, are, you know, they're supposed to be exercised regularly, and we actually have gotten to the level now where we've kind of gotten into, we might exercise it and it might not come back to life. So we've kind of been operating under that premise, but we would definitely, it would definitely be a Herculean effort to get something short term to get the courthouse back operation.
So what I'm hearing is the additional 10 million is needed just
Yes,
for items that we have to have,
yeah,
not want to have.
right. These eventually that will happen.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, just to highlight that, it's resiliency and business continuity. Those are not necessarily beneficial for energy savings. And the other thing that the commissioners probably saw is this is only for the 5 large buildings right now. We're going to have to step into looking at public safety building and a number of other ones that fall into the less than 100,000, because there's tiered approaches to these requirements to meet the standards.
So we're on strong financial footing. This is a ton of money for us. How the hell are these other counties that are in really bad shape gonna be able to, absorb a blow like that? I mean, this is crazy. I mean, City of Spokane, I mean, they're $50 million in the hole. How are they going to do this to their, I mean, this is
School districts.
school does, I mean, we all knew it was gonna be a big number, but like, when you actually see it, it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
wow. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, I guess there's always hope. You're holding out like, oh, maybe we're overshooting, maybe it's not gonna be, but I mean, wow. I mean, this is crazy. I don't think a lot of people really understand how
Wow.
bad it's gonna be or how expensive it's
Right,
It's
well,
really
I think
gonna be.
we're seeing too, I'm hearing from commercial businesses.
Yeah.
Commercial
Yeah.
landowners. That, I mean, this is gonna be hitting them as well, and they're just starting to figure it out, going, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
that
this-
We can't,
this is
I
wild.
think it's the older building owners that have buildings that were probably built in the 70s, trying to get them to comply with this bill. That is why we had many conversations with Mike Burgess to see what the thought process, and we were a little bit surprised that the EUI targeting, which we were kind of thinking based upon some of the conversations we had early, even with other counties, would have went the other direction, but it got tighter. Yeah, based on they basically gave
states
it,
doing
they gave it a different rating based upon hours of operation. Yeah, so we were very surprised. And again, our plan here was to come up with the best solution that we could to meet these EUI targets.
Thanks for the good news.
Sorry. The bearer of good news, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I know we gotta, continue to move forward, we gotta
Yeah.
figure it out. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't have
Yeah, there's no way
choice.
around it,
Yeah.
but it's just.
Well, and as part of this audit that we did, we've determined the best course of action to hit those EUI targets. We'll continue down that process of developing that plan as we can. And then that way we can discuss it further down the road once we make a decision.
Mike.
Hey, Joe, you're talking about moving the generator over to the DEM location?
It's actually not the DEM. We're gonna be taking a small amount of the motorcycle.
Oh, perfect.
We
Okay.
just have to bridge it underneath the facility. The idea was the switchgear that we looked in there would not only replace the one that's actually, we're finding parts for that thing on eBay. But we've gotten to the level with that system too, that we have no added capacity. If there was ever a measure or anything to extend out or build on to which you have the capability to do. But we don't have the electrical infrastructure.
So if we don't meet these targets, what's happens?
So that's the big one. So there are fines that are involved and there are fines based upon square footage. And if you go back, depending on how they want to do it, you know, if you look at our overall square footage, you know, we're right in that, you know, almost 700,000 square feet. There is kind of a $1 per square foot fine along with it. Another fine. Ken has the exact write out on that, but again, I think that they were
I mean, it
with the
doesn't
amount
matter if we're trying to get close, it's just if we don't meet the target by that date. It's
That-
gonna be-
that was my plan originally when we met with Mike Burgess to open those discussions and dialogue, was moving forward, being, you know, a building owner, being energy conscious, and as new technologies arrive that you can afford, is going down that road and capturing that information. But unfortunately, the EUI targets that the Department of Commerce set for these types of operations, we just can't hit, especially in our zone climate. We just, the jail and the public safety building, we just can't hit it.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, appreciate you coming and starting the process, and I will, I'll ask more questions at
Yep.
my board meeting with other counties as to what they're doing, but I mean, I know I've heard from school districts as well that they're gonna find this very difficult to try to meet.
Yeah, I've had some conversations with the director out at Eastern and how some of them are approaching it, and even with the newer technologies that they're looking at, that also comes with the cost, even though there are some incentives to go those directions, but they consume so much more energy. You have to really calculate in that monthly cost of what it's gonna take extra to run those operations.
And space, as you said,
Exactly.
so.
Yep.
Yeah, space is kind of at a premium.
Yep.
So, okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be back.
Yes.
But yeah, we understand you gotta keep moving forward.
Yeah, we'll keep fine tuning the plans that we have on the table, really take a really good look at them. We'll really take a good look at the rebating side of it, make sure that we're still in the ballparks. The savings number, we'll try to find every bit of savings that we possibly can. So we'll keep
Yeah,
refining.
well, and we
those.
might even talk with John Colton, our federal lobbyist, to see if there's any federal potential grants that are out there too, because I don't know, as all these new standards are coming down, these are state requirements on us, but is there stuff from the feds that if people are meeting new standards?
Yep.
So that might be worth that phone call.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Hey, and I'm sorry we're behind.
Oh, not bad.
Not bad.
We might catch up.
So come on. Okay. Nice to see you. Thanks
Nice
for
to
coming
see
over
you.
from
Thank
Seattle.
you. Yeah, absolutely.
Get the sunshine.
I was. Oh, goodness.
Although I think it's sunny over there too right now, so
It's
yeah.
not.
Which one? Wait. just a
Yeah.
second. Since we only have one other commissioner, we'll wait till he's.
Internet,
Sorry.
which Wi-Fi to use that actually gets you on. Yeah, I was kicked off when I opened mine up, so took me a minute to get on too.
Oh, really?
So,
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, commissioners, thank you for the time. Deanna, is our bond counsel from Pacifica. And we thought, now that we haven't issued debt for a while, so we thought this may be a good time to just go over the basics. And plus, this would be the first time the two new commissioners have been part of a debt issue. Unfortunately, they're not here, but they can listen to the playback. So we thought it'd be good to have Deanna just do the basics of bonds and what your responsibilities are.
Thank you.
Commissioners, good morning. There's nothing better than bonds early on a Monday morning than bonds recorded from early on a Monday morning. So, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. As Randy mentioned, I'm a member or a partner of Pacifica Law Group, and I'm one person on your bond counsel team. You know, Stacey Lewis, her and I are interchangeable on the bond and disclosure council side. Allison Benj, our tax partner, of course, always is available to you and reviews all of the ongoing compliance with federal tax matters relating to your tax exempt bonds. And then, of course, you have the rest of the team at your disposal as well. So I'm here carrying the Pacifica water. But given where we're at and a number of financings right now, and I know that last week there was some conversation at not only this the board level, but also at the debt committee level about potential TIF financing and then a potential airport revenue bond financing. And so we thought it would be a good time just to kind of bring everything all together. So today we're going to talk about, and we can kind of go through this pretty quickly, actually, trying to catch up with the schedule, but we're going to talk about just an overview of bond financing in general. I'm really going to start with state law and the sources of credit and security, really how your bonds are categorized basically from a source of repayment and security standpoint. And then turn to federal tax law and then federal securities law. And that is one of your bonds up there on the screen. So there you go. All right, next slide. No, who has the, oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. I was like, who should I wave at? Just starting with big picture here with state law. Under Washington state law, bonds are evidence of an obligation to repay a debt. So really it's anytime there's a loan. So we talk about bonds a lot in the publicly sold context when the county issues securities on the capital markets. Those are sold to retail and commercial investors and traded on a day-to-day basis. Those are definitely one type of bond. Bonds are also loans, so bank loans, very similar to you and I going out and getting a loan for a vehicle or for a home, and also other types of debt. So purchase contracts, conditional sales contracts, some lease obligations, promissory notes. Anytime there's an agreement that evidences an obligation to repay borrowed money, Washington law refers to that as a bond. So it captures quite a bit from a Washington state's law standpoint. All right, next slide, please. Staying with our big picture theme here, bonds may be issued on a tax exempt basis. This is for federal income taxes as well as state income taxes for those states who have a personal income tax, meaning that interest paid to the investor holding the tax exempt municipal bond can exclude those interest earnings from federal taxation from their taxable income. It's not automatic though. I get asked that question quite a bit about isn't all municipal bonds, aren't they all tax exempt? The answer is no. There's a number of qualifications that need to be satisfied, requirements satisfied at closing, as well as over the life of the entire bond issue. So if there are 20-year bonds, those requirements, of course, last for 20 years over the entire facility that's bond financed. And they're subject to securities laws. So we'll talk a bit about securities laws and the application of the federal anti-fraud requirements. Looking at common financing methods, there's been some questions I've heard about what a private placement is versus a public sale. So type of sale that I mentioned a moment ago, where bonds are sold on public markets in typically $5,000 increments. That's a public sale. Usually it's sold to an underwriter on either a negotiated or a competitive sale basis. Negotiated sale basis is when you have an underwriter with you along for the journey. They're at the table, part of document production, and there's a negotiated price between the county and the underwriter, and a bond purchase contract that's signed between the underwriter and the county. The underwriter then, on closing, turns around and sells those bonds to the ultimate investors. On a competitive sale, on the flip side, it's almost like an auction, if you will, on the day of pricing. So the county prepares disclosure documents, goes out to the capital markets and says, all right, on this day, we're going to accept bids. for the purchase of our bonds. And bids come in on that morning and then the lowest overall cost is the one that wins. Bank financing or private placement is another method.
I
Yeah,
was just gonna ask,
Yes,
because you can
please.
actually have it be where bonds that aren't, for some reason, aren't selling, the underwriter purchases to then sell.
correct. So
So
in
it's
a
kind of a
negotiated
mix of the
sale,
two.
exactly. So in a negotiated sale, the underwriter agrees to purchase all the bonds if any are sold. So no matter what, the underwriter is on the hook to purchase all the bonds. And then if that underwriter cannot turn around and sell those bonds on the secondary market to the ultimate investors, the underwriter is still on the hook. So that is it's a shifting of the risk then to the underwriter. So that's very much true. Same with the competitive sale. So the competitive sale, the purchaser of the bonds, the underwriter in that case agrees to buy all the bonds as well. And so again, shifting that risk to that purchaser as well. Bank financing, there is similar to getting a loan, like you mentioned, for your vehicle or for your house. Those are private placements. I'll skip down to state loans because these are also, instead of going to, very similar to a private, they are a private placement, I should say, but instead of going to a bank and getting financing, the state has loan programs. That local option capital asset lending program, or the local program, is a program that a lot of jurisdictions use for financing smaller items, such as equipment, vehicles, things like that, sometimes real property. But it really, the state program allows for economies of scale. And so multiple entities to come together with smaller borrowings and then pooling those borrowings together. It's how that program works. Public Works Trust Fund loans, which of course the county has a number of insert revolving fund programs, all those different types of state programs. Those are also loans or bonds for purposes of Washington state law. There's also federal programs that we work with a lot of clients with, USDA, of course, rural development programs, and WIFIA and TIFIA. So infrastructure financing through low cost of borrowing federal programs. That's kind of the gamut of different types of financing mechanisms. And then we'll turn next to the types of credit and then kind of, like I said, the categories that your bonds fall into. Starting with general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds typically fall into two different categories. The one on the left, unlimited tax general obligation bonds, are voter approved. That requires a 60% supermajority vote plus validation requirements. And the reason for that is because not only are voters approving the issuance of the bonds themselves by the county, but they're also approving an excess property tax levy to be imposed as unlimited as to amounts, so not subject to the $5.90 or the $10 limit on real property to generate a stream of revenue that's used to repay those unlimited tax general obligation bonds. So those bonds are payable from that excess property tax levy, and that excess property tax levy can't be used for anything else. Every year in the legislature, there's some movement to reduce that 60% threshold down to a lower amount, whether it's 50% or last time around 55%. It is challenging for a lot of jurisdictions, especially since we've had a lot of public schools in particular, exactly. Schools don't have a lot of other options for financing their larger capital projects. And so, and reaching that 60% supermajority approval is rather challenging. It's 60% now. We'll see how long it stays 60% in the future. There is a limit on how much UTGO bond can be issued. That's capped at 2.5% of assessed valuation within the county at the time the bonds are issued. That 2.5%, you subtract out from that amount also the amount of limited tax general obligation bonds from that. So we'll turn to that next. Those are your non-voted councilmanic, otherwise known as councilmanic bonds. So these bonds are payable from regular property taxes and other legally available sources. So for example, in 2022, the county issued, this is the last publicly sold LTGO bond issue that the county did. LTGO bonds to finance the small arms facility. And revenue received from the Air Force are used to repay a portion of these bonds. From a bondholder perspective, the county also gave its full faith and a pledge of its full faith and credit and regular property taxes to the as a source of repayment and security for these bonds. But the Air Force revenues are definitely were pledged also for that purpose. There is a debt capacity on your non-voted LTGO bonds as well. That's a 1.5%. So when you do your overall calculations for general purposes, it's a 2.5% voted debt minus whatever within that 1.5% is outstanding. So the total aggregate amount of bonds payable for property taxes doesn't exceed that 2.5% within these two categories. So that's one of those limitations on from a state law perspective that keeps that number lower for benefit of course property taxpayers. All right, next slide, please. There was talk last week, discussion last week regarding tax increment financing, and I know the county has issued or what we call TIF bonds in the past. So we thought it would be helpful to have just some background up here on TIF because there are various options under Washington state law regarding TIF. And so if you're doing some research on your own, you may run into new TIF versus the old TIF, which the county has used in the past. So on the left-hand side is community revitalization financing, and that is the legal construct that the county has used in the past to finance your TIF projects and your TIF increment areas, and to capture that value-added component to finance those public improvements. The community revitalization financing is a form of TIF. We have a hard time in Washington having any kind of TIF. So if you're familiar with tax increment financing from other jurisdictions, you may just be wondering, why don't we just have regular TIF? Why do we have all these various versions of it? And Washington is unique in that we have, and it's two main things that we run against, or three main things we run against in the TIF world under Washington law, is that TIF captures the, or regular TIF, it's intended to capture the incremental increases in the property taxes generated from the increases in assessed valuation in the increment area. It's a mouthful. But what we have here in Washington is we have a constitutional provision that says that state property taxes are dedicated to the support of public schools. And so there is not a way to capture those state regular property taxes and use it towards your TIF improvements. So what we have is we have various other types of TIF which capture the local property taxes or the local sales and use taxes and leave out the state property taxes because those are dedicated to, like I said, support of common schools. So community revitalization financing is one type of TIF that was created to accommodate for this state financing of schools constitutional provision. We also have, which is one thing that runs into on the community revitalization side, is that the amount that the jurisdiction can increase their regular property tax levy year over year is subject to, of course, the 101% cap on regular property taxes. The old TIF, or the TIF that's been used in the past, does not provide an exception for the 101%. So that was a struggle that occurred with this type of TIF being used on a far and wide basis. The county has used community revitalization financing for, I last counted 6 different projects, and has used it as it's been a really great tool for the county to develop improvements within certain designated increment areas. But one of the issues is that it doesn't account for the 101%. New TIF, on the other hand, and if you look and to a lot of information that's out there on TIF in Washington, it'll be in reference to this new TIF statute that was adopted in 2021. And it is kind of the closest thing that we have in Washington now to the traditional tax increment financing. And it allows for certain increment areas to be created. So very similar to old TIF. The sponsoring jurisdiction designates the increment area and develops or issues the TIF bonds or on a pay-go basis, does the TIF improvements. And then similar to the old TIF, the incremental increase is captured and used to repay those obligations. Under the new TIF statute, 100% of those incremental increases are captured. But the catch here is that this is really almost designed as a pilot program. There's a limit on how big the TIF can be, and you can only have 2 at a time. So there's been 1 or 2 issues of bonds under the new TIF program. So where a lot of jurisdictions are using it for new projects. But it is functionally different than the program that the county has used in the past. So when you're thinking about TIF projects, just kind of keep those things in mind. All right, the next slide. Revenue bonds, and over on the left-hand side are another kind of category of bonds, and we'll dive into a little bit deeper into airport revenue bonds in just a moment. But revenue bonds are not secured by the full faith and credit or the taxing power, whether excess or regular, of the county. They are what we call enterprise bonds, or bonds that are payable from a special fund. So revenue bonds, unless there's an exception that's made where the county takes an extra step and does pledge those regular property taxes, revenue bonds in the traditional sense do not count against the county's debt capacity. So we have what we have to call a special fund doctrine in Washington state. So if bonds are payable from amounts on deposit in a special enterprise fund, then bondholders only have recourse against that fund and not against the general fund or the general revenues of the issuer. So these would include your water, sewer, storm, electric, or traditional types of revenue bond financing, where the bonds are issued to fund improvements to the enterprise, and the bonds are repaid from rates and charges collected from the customers who use the enterprise. So for example, water rates and charges are used to repay water bonds. There's no debt capacity constraints. There's no maximum amount for how many or how much revenue bonds an issuer can have outstanding, but there are practical or covenant limitations that are oftentimes built in. So for example, there might be tests that need to be satisfied, almost stress tests for additional bonds to be issued, or for ratio coverage requirements on an annual basis. And that's really for the benefit of the bondholders to make sure that there's enough cash flow in order to keep the enterprise up and running, because that's the entity, or that's the asset that is used to create revenue, and also to cover your debt service requirements. Assessment bonds are very similar to TIF bonds. That's over on the right-hand side of the column here, in that they're again they're payable from this value-added concept similar to a TIF bond, where assessment bonds are a road improvement district or a local improvement district, where the improvements benefit a specific area. That area can be, specific area can be created, and instead of in a TIF context where the debt is repaid from that incremental increases in property taxes, in the assessment context, the debt is repaid from assessments imposed on the property owners within that assessment area. So very statutory driven, and there's a number of requirements that have to go forward in order to issue assessment bonds. Again, very commonly used, very statutory driven. All right, last but not least, is our next slide, which dives into just kind of a entree into the airport revenue bonds, the proposed bonds that have been discussed a number of times at this board level. As you all know, in the 1960s, the county and the city came together, formed the airport board in the airport joint operation agreement, for the purposes, of course, financing and operating the Spokane Airport. That agreement was amended in 2019 and restated in 2019. And under that agreement, the county is the issuer of bonds for airport purposes, and those bonds are paid from revenues of the airport. So the proposed bonds that are out there percolating for expansions to the airport right now are revenue bonds, so they would not count against the county's debt capacity. They are paid from revenues of the airport as an enterprise. It's general revenues, passenger facility charges, customer facility charges, and other legally available revenues. It's a whole bunch of bells and whistles that are built in from a revenue perspective into airport revenue bonds. We anticipate that there'll be an airport bond agreement between the county and the airport to really just identify the roles and responsibilities of the parties. That of course will be brought back to this board along with issuing resolutions and other authorizing documents. Again, the airport revenue bonds would fall into that same category as a revenue bond. So recourse would be against the funds that are in that special fund, the airport funds. All right, that covers state law, and also kind of the main categories of bonds that the county has either touched on in the past or is contemplating for future issuances. Now we're going to turn to federal law. So first we'll talk about federal tax law. As I mentioned earlier, bonds can be issued as tax exempt obligations. Loans, leases can also be issued as tax exempt obligations. The requirements of the Internal Revenue Code and the regulations that follow do need to be complied with at closing, as well as for the life of the bond issue. So what we look at as your bond counsel at closing is what the expected use of the facility is. Is it for county purposes? Is it for other purposes, such as, for example, looking again at your 2022 small arms project? Is there any private use, or is there federal use, or is there nonprofit use? Of course, with the 2022 obligations, the Air Force, of course, uses a component of the portion of the building. And so we factored that into our overall tax analysis and separated the bonds into two separate series as a result. Federal tax law limits how much private business use can occur at a tax exempt bond finance facility. From the Fed's perspective, private business use is not only what you would think of in the traditional sense, such as a private corporation coming in and using a facility and having financial benefit, but also nonprofits and the federal government itself. So we take into account the expected uses, and we also look at what the rate of spending those bond proceeds are, because federal tax law impacts the investment and arbitrage of bond proceeds. And so we spent a lot of time working with the finance group on making sure that all those rules and regulations are complied with. But the federal tax law, just kind of the takeaway here is that federal tax law does impact kind of the business uses, the overall use of your facility, and then also facilities as they're disposed of. So if you're surplusing property, for example, and there's tax exempt debt that is still outstanding that paid for those facilities, we'll want to take remedial action, and there's a number of steps that need to be taken. So it's just things to think about. All right, next we'll turn to federal securities laws. And this is the last big concept that we're going to cover as part of this, and then happy to answer questions at the end. from a federal securities law standpoint, municipal securities are exempt from a lot of the federal securities laws that you might see in a corporate context if you're familiar with corporate securities. So the good news is that there's exemptions from a lot of the registration and pre-review requirements, the filing requirements that you may be familiar with on your day-to-day basis. But the federal anti-fraud rules do apply to all municipal securities. And there are two major anti-fraud requirements on the federal side that we'll want to just discuss, touch on here. If we go to the next slide. Great. One is Rule 10b-5 and the other is Section 17A of the Securities Act. And they both essentially say the same thing. And this is relevant not only to the materials that are put out in connection with the bond issue, but as we'll discuss in a minute, this is really relevant to any time an issuer or its individuals who are speaking on behalf of the issuer. So who are believed to or have an expectation to know about, to be familiar with the finances and the current status of the county in this case, are speaking in a public setting, and those comments are expected to reach investors. The anti-fraud rules do apply to those as well. So this is one of the reasons why we bring this up, because it is something that impacts all of us on a day-to-day basis. So what the anti-fraud laws prohibit are any untrue statements of material facts or omitting a material fact that's necessary in order to make the statements that are made in light of those circumstances in which they were made not misleading. So put another way, and probably more English, is that all communications in connection with the sale or marketing of securities need to be true, accurate, and complete. And so there's two different standards of how a violation can occur. One is a higher standard of really intentional fraud. So if you know that the information is inaccurate or incomplete and you put that information out to investors. The other is a little more concerning, and it's just a negligence standard. And so the negligence standard applies in connection with the primary offering of the securities themselves. So for example, preparing the initial disclosure, such as this is a official statement that was prepared in connection with the 2022 bonds. That negligence standard, which is the lower standard to have a violation, would apply to those initial offerings. All right, next slide, please.
And we rely on Randy to make sure.
I know. Exactly.
I have to read every word.
Exactly. So the question we always get next is, what the heck is material? If everything needs to be materially accurate and complete, what does that mean? And of course, the SEC won't tell us because that would make our jobs too easy. Right. And so, exactly, it depends.
As a former auditor.
Yes, exactly. It completely depends. So we look at case law to find out, to look at the definition of material. And the definition that we use in the municipal securities world is whether there's a substantial likelihood that a reasonable bond investor would have considered the information or the omission important in making an investment decision. So would it have either changed their mind to purchase or to not purchase those securities? And so it's not the standpoint of us as your bond counsel or as anyone in their official capacity, but it's really looking at materiality from the view of the reasonable bond investor, which could be anybody on the street. And so that's the lens that we look at the materials when we're preparing on the county's behalf as your disclosure counsel. The information that's contained, and that of course is how Randy and others are looking at the materials through that materiality lens. All right, next slide.
Which is why you just do it right.
Exactly, which is why I just do it right. Exactly.
And you don't worry about it.
Yep, exactly. So when do you speak to the market? As I mentioned a moment ago, there's a primary disclosure, such as this official statement that is used in offering the sale of the securities originally. There's also ongoing disclosure the county has undertaken in connection with its publicly sold bonds that it will provide information to the market on an annual basis. The publicly sold bonds are bought and sold on a day-to-day basis. And so new investors get that information on an annual basis. It's posted on a designated website. And they also get notice of the occurrence of certain events, such as a rating change. So that is your secondary market disclosure when the anti-fraud rules are kick in.
And I believe the Emma report, we do that by the 1st of September. Or
It's due by September 30th.
And
September
it's
30th,
And
exactly.
it's with our.
it is sent
Right.
to Pacifica and they actually file.
Yes, yes.
And it's with our audited financial statements.
Correct,
So,
yes, correct. The obligation is to provide the audited financial statements by September 30th. If the audit is not available for some reason, unaudited needs to be filed. And then certain additional operating data, which is typically included in your audit. And then, of course,
And I
notice
I believe we missed that deadline.
We may have I don't know if the audit was completely done last year. We still file the unaudited if we didn't.
Yeah,
And then you have 10 days to file the audited, once the audit is.
right. What trips up a lot of jurisdictions, and I can look and see if you're prior clients is the notice to provide the occurrence of certain events. So for example, a rating change, if that happens, notice has to be filed on Emma within 10 business days of when it occurs, not when you find out about it. So if we get notice that's late or after that 10 days has ran, then it's out of compliance. The only remedy for a bondholder if county gets out of compliance with ongoing disclosure is strict performance. There's no financial penalty. It's just put it up there on Emma.
I guess I'm just publicly saying we've met our obligations
filed,
and
yes.
yes, we haven't had those issues.
No, you
Here.
guys have been in really great shape.
So, yeah.
Exactly. And you have policies and procedures regarding this and it's a good dialogue. And the fact that you're doing this training is actually something that the SEC would really love. So it's a gold star there too. It falls along with the
We
training.
did file audit.
Correct. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
And
I
then
mean, sometimes when you're talking about all these things, I just want to say, but here it's.
And you do this. You
You
do all of this,
So-
exactly.
Just so the public knows.
Yes. And then the third category of when the anti-fraud rules apply is voluntary disclosure. So this is any additional postings on Emma. So if there's, in addition to those annual filings of audited financial statements or notices of certain events, for example, that are required, if there's additional postings. So for example, we saw a lot of voluntary disclosure being posted up on Emma during COVID. Just giving more timely and up-to-date information regarding financial, impacts of COVID. And the state, for example, a number of other jurisdictions, for example, posted additional voluntary information up on Emma dealing with the COVID impacts. Issuer investor relations websites are also another space where, again, that's intended to reach investors, it's for investors, and so the anti-fraud rules apply there. So last but not least, just to kind of drive home the importance of the anti-fraud rules in 2020, the SEC Office of Municipal Securities released a statement summarizing existing law, that's how they put it, not creating new law, but just as a reminder that the anti-fraud requirements apply to public statements by issuers. So in this case, of course, the county, anytime those public statements are intended to reach investors. That is a really hard thing to imagine because public entities don't have an option to stay silent. Everything you're doing is in the public setting. And so just as a reminder that when you are in open public meetings or issuing public memoranda or other public comments are made or putting things up on the website, that if it's reasonably expected to reach investors, which I would assume a lot of those things are, because anybody can be an investor, that they need to be true, accurate. And that's just kind of a words of caution for everyone involved.
No, and we've got Patrick, our PIO is is on the call as well.
Yes.
And, no, I mean, as, again, for Spokane County, we try to be very transparent and
Yes,
try to make sure that we're getting all the correct information out there.
absolutely.
Everything's fact-based.
Yes, absolutely. And everything is fact-based and everything is all tidy in a row. It's, yeah,
Because-
it's very, very good.
Because truly anyone in the public would be considered potential investors, so anything we say is, you know, seen under this, so.
It can be, yeah. So it's good. And you are all very aware of these requirements and it is members of the commission and then also staff are very aware of the requirements and what needs to be done. All right, next slide. And that's it. So happy to answer any comment or questions. And if there's any comments, happy to take those. We'll be up here again, probably to talk about TIF and some other bonds coming up soon and any other financing projects that you have. I don't know if Randy has anything.
I have nothing else, but no, we don't have, but thank you, commissioners, for the time. We, as you know, we will have the airport agreements to bring before you soon. We're getting very close with those. And then if the TIF does go forward, we would have that issuance as well. And then any other issuances that the commissioners may decide to do.
So when we talked about the refunding, does that go through specific?
No, that would be a different vehicle if we do decide to go that way.
Because with rate
that was-
changing again,
Right,
Yeah.
so it may not be as good right now. But that would be more through our municipal advisor. We don't need, we think that would be a
Is this like,
technical cash defeasance.
for cash defeasance, you will bring a resolution forward.
That would
And,
be about
yep,
it, though.
and that would be about it, right? And so instead of issuing bonds to refinance existing debt, be using cash to pay off existing debt.
Okay.
And
and then I do think just in a recent conversation that the finance committee with the airport is thinking of this fall, September.
The earliest they are thinking of is September. If they can't make that, they're thinking early next year.
Okay.
That's the current targets.
Targets. Okay, that makes sense. So. Well, very good. Well, thank you.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate the time and we'll be talking about bonds soon.
Yes, well, thank you for coming over and joining us. So appreciate that. Very good. Thank you. Okay, so then George.
Good morning, commissioners. Today we want to just kind of go over a status update on our request for proposal that we put out. We've kind of given a few touch points along the way. Just a week and a half ago, April 11th, we met with our advisory committee to
And
the
then
Board of County Commissioners.
I do just want to make a point that Commissioner Jordan has just joined us, so we do have a quorum at this, for this moment.
Very good. So the the advisory committee to the Housing and Community Development Department, they met on April 11th to kind of go over a few, or to go over all the applications, make their funding recommendations to you all. So I wanted to give you an advance notice of what those recommendations look like before they come to you in a formal briefing and then the legislative action. So first, wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about our philosophy going into this. One of the things that we really want to do is make sure that we were engaging with the community, that we were listening to the needs, the priorities that they stated, and that throughout our entire process that we were staying true to those comments that we received from folks. And then the second pillar was really simplicity. We wanted to make sure it was simple for staff, simple for the advisory committee, and then simple for our partner agencies. And based on the feedback surveys that we conducted, it sounds like we were able to achieve a simplicity for the partner agencies. I believe, Chris, the average is about 4 hours for folks to complete the application. So really trying to make that simple. And then the review committee looked like it was about between 20 and 30 minutes to review each application. So, so that went really well, which is good because our volume was significant. So Rebecca, if you'll advance. So what was included in this request for proposal? So in the past, the department had broke out the request for proposal to a bunch of different funding sources. And in this one, we just wanted to combine everything to one large request for proposal. So that included our federal funding sources from HUD, Community Development Block Grant, Home, and then the Emergency Solutions Grant, as well as our state commerce funds, the Consolidated Homeless Grant, and then our local revenue through our documented reporting fees, and then sales and use tax specifically to homeless services and affordable housing. So, so we engaged with the community. We had a stakeholder meeting on November 14th and then November 12th, really encouraging folks to come out. We had an incredible attendance at both of these meetings. We developed from that a series of needs and priorities. Before we went out to before we opened the request for proposal to the public, we had an ad hoc group take a look at it that comprised of philanthropy, a former committee member that I've worked with when I was at the city of Spokane, as well as a former executive director of a human services organization.
So at your stakeholder engagements, did you have members of the committee that were looking at these RFPs? Or was it just our staff?
No, so we had a variety of folks that were in attendance at that. I think we had 26 different agencies represented at those stakeholder meetings.
Right, but I guess what I'm asking is, did we also have the review, you know, our I never can say, but whatever.
The advisory
The
committee.
advisory committee, there we go, thank you. Were they in attendance?
Yeah, we didn't have all of them, but we had a handful of folks that attended both of those meetings.
Thank you.
So we opened the request for proposal on January 26th and it closed on March 8th. And then the next slide is going to give us the results of that. I told the team that I thought we were going to get a large response of probably 30 to 35 applications. We ended up with 53 applications in total. Total requests were just short of $21.5 million for approximately $10.5 million that we had available. Important note, the department does not typically have $10.5 million of funds to allocate out. We had a few years of funding that was not dispersed through the home program. That's one of our federal sources. So that elevated the number of funds that we have. Generally, we're between $7.5 to $8 million a year is what our annual allocation looks like. So, so on the April 11th meeting with the advisory committee, they reviewed 51 applications. We had 2 applications that didn't pass the minimum threshold for eligibility. So we notified those folks that we would not be taking their applications to the advisory committee for consideration. So we had, of those 51 applications, just short of $20 million to be considered. The committee, in a matter of just over 2 hours, was able to get through all of these applications and make their funding recommendations to you all. So that is 31 applications, 19 of those are for homeless services, 3 for affordable housing, and then 9 for community development activities. So we've over allocated the amount of funds you can see here at almost $4 million. And the reason for that is Commerce has indicated that there's a probability that additional funds will be coming to our department. So what we did was we layered some alternatives in there. So we said, committee members, if we have additional revenue that comes in, how would you allocate these funds? And the intent there was to not have to go back out into the community and conduct a whole nother request for proposal and put the bandwidth around that. So that's why we have a greater than number of funds that have been recommended. The staff has done a great job of reaching out to all of the folks that have submitted their applications. We followed up with everyone on the 12th, the day after the recommendations were made, to let them know that they were either not considered for funding, they were considered for funding in full, they were considered for funding in part, or that they were an alternative funding allocation. So we've had a whole bunch of communication. This last week we did 5 debriefings with different agencies that wanted to hear more about their application, how they could improve, and so forth. One of the things I want to do is point out to you all the advisory committee, the current structure of the advisory committee. So you can see that we're starting to get fully fill all the seats on the advisory committee. We have a few more to fill. You will be at tomorrow's legislative meeting. You have Larry Bowman on your agenda for approval. So that will take care of the city of Airway Heights. And then we have a few other folks that are pending approval. David Lewis will go before the Liberty Lake City Council. I believe it's this week for his formal recommendation to you all. We're still needing a representative from Deer Park as well as the town of Waverly. I was contacted by someone that may put an application to represent the second at-large South position on the committee. So we're doing a really good job, and I appreciate all of you's help getting those positions filled. So next, I just wanted to really quickly highlight the different projects that have been recommended for funding. So we've got, first of all, we're the homeless services. And one of the things that you'll see with the homeless services is we broke them out by intervention type. That's dynamic. We've not done that in the past. And so part of that has to do with the funding requirements, particularly the Commerce Consolidated Homeless Grant has very specific line items in that budget. So this first one was for emergency shelter. You can see we received a significant number of requests for emergency shelters. And this is only representative of those applications that were considered for funding. So if there are additionals that are not included in these lists that I have for you all, and we can provide those, the comprehensive summary of those 51 applications upon your request as well. So just giving you an idea of where we're at with all of that. Emergency shelter had a huge ask. We didn't have a lot of money there. And I think, Chris, it's probably fair to say that the advisory committee was really trying to focus on interventions that were maybe more preventative in nature as opposed to the emergency shelter in that regard. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, and the intervention types that were split up that George mentions too, it's also worth noting that a lot of those different intervention types are split from one funding source, whereas the next funding source that you'll see coming up, homelessness prevention funding source, utilizes that on its own. So the emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, those types of intervention types were really really wide-reaching asks with not a lot of funds to give out.
Commissioner Jordan, you raised your hand.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry if you explain this, but this list, is this only listing the entities that received some sort of award, or does it include every entity that made a request under this bucket?
What you're seeing in front of you right now are only those that received either full funding, partial funding, or were selected as an alternate. It does not show those that were not selected.
And that's selected by the advisory committee, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I would appreciate just having the full list, just myself, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely.
I'd like a copy of that too.
Yeah, I'd say just send it to all the commissioners. That didn't happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Kat Nichols.
Thank you, commissioners. I just wanted to commend George and his team. I had the opportunity of attending HCDAC meetings prior to George coming on board in leadership. And I can just tell you that the manner in which George and his team have engaged this process has made it, just uplifted it in such a way, made it so professional, so much simpler, and in the best way for both the community and the folks doing the work. I just really want to give a shout out to George and his team. That was the most amazing HCDAC meeting I have ever attended. So well done.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you, Kat. Awesome job.
Thanks. So the next one is the homeless prevention. So this was the area that we had the greatest amount of funding in as it related to the commerce allocation. So you can see here the total amount of funds that were requested matches the total amount awarded, and everyone was awarded in full there. So we're really excited about that one.
How did that work out?
It worked out from a very large allocation from Commerce. I think really the current biennium that we're in with Commerce, what they allocated to the Consolidated Homeless Grant, was really looking at effectively that COVID cliff with funding sources that were available. So they invested heavily into homeless prevention in that regard. So Chris, anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, I would say that for the first, I guess, fiscal or programmatic year as well, some of those homeless prevention dollars were underspent, and so we just had a little bit of extra to give out for this last part of the biennium.
So on this list, looking at it, we've got a couple that, you know, like Cheney's there twice and Medical Lake's there twice, you know, is so what.
So those are examples of actually projects that were submitted in other areas that were kind of consolidated into this round of funding. So that was also a piece to the meeting, was not making sure that we didn't exclude applicants that may have put applications that could get funded in multiple funding sources. We wanted to discuss that with the advisory committee as well. So those were two examples of another portfolio discussing these projects and bringing them into an area that we did have some additional funding to provide.
Okay, and then as someone who's in South County, Southeast County, you know, I'm not seeing any services down in those that area. Was there a request for that, or is it just through some of the larger organizations those individuals are being helped?
Yeah, I don't believe that we had any requests coming out of there. That's one of the things that we're intending to do as we build out a timeline for our next request for proposal. So you see us back here. Well, it will be the first quarter of 25. So as we've kind of built out our work plan for that, one of the things that we're going to do is go out into our different quadrants of the county so we can get some better engagement with those areas we don't typically see responses from.
Yeah, because I mean, even in North County, I mean, and we know there's homeless in North. So I'm not sure who's providing services though.
Yeah. Can I ask on the SNAP one, it says eviction prevention, is that rental assistance? Or is that?
Yes, yeah.
That is what that is?
Yeah, those programs can fund, you know, the case management support that they also receive in that piece as well, but primarily those homelessness prevention projects, those would be like vouchers
Okay.
for rental assistance,
Okay.
security deposits, those things.
Okay.
And you'll see some more of your constituents represented in the different areas of funding as we go through this as well. So rapid rehousing, another form of homeless intervention to help folks get situated into an apartment outside of the more typical sheltering facilities. So you can see we've got some good investments there as well. Catholic Charities with their St. Margaret shelter, they've been doing rapid rehousing for a very long time and been really successful with that, as has SNAP.
And they're supposed to be doing it for the entire area. It's not just their facility. They're supposed to be helping anyone, whether it's someone from BOA or Salvation Army. That's a contract specifically just with them and I guess SNAP now to do that for the entire community.
Yeah, I think you're wading into some of the coordinated entry and
Maybe
how that
that's fine.
triage system works. Chris, any words of wisdom there?
Yeah, put me on the spot. Yeah, so they are, you know, their intake process, they are bringing in people from the entirety of the county. The coordinated entry system is supposed to pull people in and direct them to where they can most appropriately receive those services. So someone in theory could walk into SNAP and kind of go through that coordinated entry process and it become apparent that they need services through some other means.
So that's not this. The coordinated.
The coordinated entry is not part of this, no.
Okay.
All of these programs shall use coordinated entry in their service delivery, so it gets a little complicated there.
Okay.
So if someone walked into, let's say, a project that we did not fund and they needed one of these services that you see on your screen here, they would be directed to SNAP to receive those services.
With a particular focus on county residents. And then an outreach program. This is a new organization that I've never worked with before. But they put together an application that really got good favor from the review committee. Chris, anything that you wanted to add on this one?
No, this is not a currently funded applicant, and there's still some moving parts with some of the award line items that folks are asking for. But these outreach projects or wide-reaching county outreach projects that are supposed to serve the entirety of the county. I believe there's an alternate in the outreach field as well.
So how do we, like, so this being a new one, how do we vet that?
I'm sorry.
How do we vet them to ensure that they're gonna be meeting the criteria needs that we have?
Absolutely. So once I meet with these applicants, probably in the next week, is really where we're going to go through the line items. And with these new programs, understanding of what the contract entails, how the project should go, and where they're getting funded from. So this most likely will be funded from the Department of Commerce. And so them having an understanding of what the requirements are for that funding source, as well as kind of putting together, here's how much is going towards staffing, here's how much is going towards supplies, etc. So that goes on over the next couple of weeks before we bring the project recommendations to y'all. At which point this award, the $401,000, may be different based on those conversations that we have.
Chris, speak a little bit to the risk assessment that we do in advance of the applications going before the committee.
Absolutely. So there's also a risk assessment piece that goes into this application vetting piece. We'll put together these kind of questions throughout the application and then pull those results afterwards. And based on those risk assessment, I guess you could say scores, determines how we'll monitor these programs moving forward. So a first-time applicant would inherently have more monitoring from us to make sure that they are kind of meeting the metrics that are outlined in their application.
So as staff, when we have a new partner that we contract with, we know that we have an additional technical assistance as well as monitoring obligation that will go along with that. And that'll be something we'll put in the special conditions of the contract itself.
Were there any other applicants in this category for outreach?
Yes, there was. For outreach, it was the SNAP Rural Access Program. They were identified as the first alternate at $203,000. So that's a more longer running program, but in the sense that they've traditionally had most of their programs housed under one program. They do a little bit of outreach, a little bit of rapid rehousing, etc. So that was identified as the first alternate for outreach.
Talk about that risk assessment. How do newly formed organizations tend to fare on that? I mean, because you don't really have a track record to really base anything on.
Yeah, they would come in as a high, medium to high risk on the staff identification kind of piece to that. And we would just operate accordingly with our monitoring as we were kind of discussing. I don't necessarily think that the moderate to high risk assessment plays has significant weighting in the program determining like funding deliberations piece. But that could be something that we look into in the future as well.
Okay. Can you tell me a little about the organization?
I can get you some information probably from the application itself. I don't have the application in front of me. They are a little bit more skewed towards, I believe they were talking in their application about missing Indigenous women and kind of the goals surrounding that subpopulation. There's also a requirement in some of these commerce funds to serve organizations that are identified as by and for organizations. So organizations that are say ran or have boards that are kind of managed by BIPOC or folks who are underserved in the community. And this is kind of one of those applications that we identified when we have those conversations the next week, seeing if they kind of meet that by and for recommendation from Commerce, and then we kind of meet that requirement as well. hope that answers your question. But I can provide a little bit more information about the organization if you'd like as well.
Did we have any type of, I mean, in all of these categories, did we have any applications that were targeted towards veterans groups or homeless veterans?
No.
I haven't seen anything on here.
No applications coming from that subpopulation or organizations that serve that subpopulation. You know, that is kind of your I guess your Venn diagram of services where your outreach projects or emergency shelter projects, they could inherently serve these populations, but not specifically target towards them, no.
And on that point, I wanted to also point out that Chris has been in communication with Veteran Services to see how we can triage better veteran services throughout our portfolio, particularly in the homeless services area. So I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to that, Chris.
No, I've had good conversations with Chris over at Vet Services about leveraging the resources that we have available with the resources that they have available to kind of do a little bit of that outreach and make sure that we're meeting those kind of service gaps that as you've identified. It's going to take a little bit more conversation surrounding what they particularly need and what they see from their folks coming in. But those conversations have been good. I think it's just kind of determining where we find those gaps in these services.
Well, there's also federal funding that is occurring, because like Charlie Geronona used to be working for the federal side for veteran services. So it'd be coordinating not just with our own county people, but also with the federal people that are doing those services as well. So, because I don't know who's took over Charlie's position, but
Sure.
He's only been gone about 6 months from here. Okay. But yeah, because he would go out and do homeless, outreach from the federal side. He was a federal employee and here in Spokane, and then provide, and Kat, you probably know all this as well, provide, get them the services they need. So I think there isn't as much local need for that because the feds are already providing that funding. We just got to get them connected to the federal support. Kat, I see your hands up.
Yeah, exactly right, Madam Chair. There's the SSVF program, there's the HUD-VASH program, there's Healthcare for Homeless Vets program. There's a lot of federal funding going in that direction. So I think the types of applications you're seeing are there to fill gaps, and there's quite a bit of funding available in the veterans realm right now at the federal level. So you are correct. That's probably why we're not seeing a lot of local applications for that sort of work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I think just on the outreach, when you're saying that the other staff, their rural outreach, again, as a commissioner that has a lot of rural area, I want to make sure that since I'm not seeing any other funding that's going towards that rural communities, Fairfield, Rockford, those areas, which have populations that I think have some homeless or people that are having hard times. So I just want to make sure that I'm seeing that as part of this.
Sure, absolutely.
So it's not just focused, internally.
Transitional housing, another short-term housing intervention type. And then for affordable housing, we had a few applications that came in. You can see we have one going to Pine Villa. So this is a SNAP project up in the northern part of Spokane. And this is really a property that has a lot of deferred maintenance. And so investing heavily in there to get that project to where it ought to be. So here you'll see some of the communities that y'all represent. So we've got Fairfield and Spangle in here. The committee did a really good job. That was one of the challenges that we gave to the committee is we need to make sure that we're being aware of our rural communities that don't have as much access to resources as some of our other areas do. So the committee did a phenomenal job of really helping out those communities as well as maintaining some of the other infrastructure that we have, capital needs throughout our continuing services. I wanted to just call out, there's a typo there where it says the Salvation Army. That's actually Reclaim project. So they were looking to acquire property out off of East Trent to help with some of their programming there. So just want to clarify
Okay, so
that.
that's not Salvation Army, it's actually Reclaim.
Yes,
but not
yes.
property. Okay, thank you.
And then some of the public services, this is the hardest one, because everyone wants these funds and it is our smallest pot of funding that we have available. So we have approximately $220,000 to go out into the community with this funding. The reason this is such attractive funding is it has the least amount of requirements as long as it's serving low, moderate income individuals. You can do a lot of operation funding, et cetera there. So, so you'll see that Inland Partners Northwest, formerly Spokane Valley Partners, they were identified as the #1 alternative. So if we were able to find some additional funding and resources, being able to fund that project. And I was able to meet with the executive director last Friday to have a conversation about that. So.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we say too. I don't really see them on the list anywhere, but they've changed their name recently. So, okay. Because they're doing a lot of services at the valley.
They are, yeah, and the other thing that you notice is the greenhouse up in Deer Park is not listed. That was another alternative if we somehow find additional resources. So so we kind of lost a few rural partners that we've traditionally funded through this request for proposal round. And we're gonna engage with all the folks that applied, that got funded, that didn't get funded, as a follow-up to this to say what worked well, what can we do to improve? Are there other areas of opportunity when we engage and make these funding awards that that allow for perhaps a different cadence of funding, et cetera, knowing that we just don't have enough money to fund everyone? And then how do we identify some of those real core community services throughout the county? And do we earmark some of those to say, these are essential services that we have? So we've got some growth and some opportunities ahead of us as a result of this, but we're excited with the work that the committee put into this process. That many applications was one of the biggest RFP responses that I've seen in my professional career. So so I'm really happy with the work that the team did in that regard.
Commissioner Jordan.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to the team. I really like the consolidation of the RFP. So really appreciate your work on that. Was wondering if we could just back up a little bit, and can you explain, my understanding is there's some kind of scoring process for each of the applications. And can you explain how that works, and then the relationship between the scoring and kind of the advisory committee's recommendations?
Yeah, thanks for that. So typically it's more of an academic. You either get 0 points or 100 points somewhere, and that's where your score lands. In an effort to simplify the process, we went with a tiered scoring review. So if you got 4, you were excellent and recommended for full funding. If you got a 3, you had a really good application and recommended for partial funding, so on and so forth, down to poor, not considered for funding. And so the committee did a really good job of scoring everyone really well. So I don't know that we had any applications below a 3-point something. So everyone really kind of locked in really tightly there. There were applications that got very good scores that did not get considered for funding or got partial funding. And that's difficult for some of the organizations to understand. I met with one of the providers, I think it was last Friday as well, where they said, well, we got a better score than this other person. Why did we not get more funding? And it's really the advisory committee, kind of their discretion as they go through that. The scoring is really a starting point to say, who do we really like, who's meeting the most priorities, and then make the funding recommendations based off of that. So, so it was a change to how we've done it in the past. And we're gonna evaluate to see if we really like that, or if we wanna go back to a 100-point scale. See if that kind of gives a little more separation in scoring.
So does the advisory committee goes through and the score is created by them in advance of the meeting? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and then
Okay.
staff has a summary of all those different scores. One thing I'll say is that this request for proposal process, I think we had just about every application had a minimum of 9 to 10 reviewers. Many had 11 reviewers. That far exceeds the amount of participation that we've had in the past.
When you share the list of all of the applications with us, can you include the scores in that list?
Yes.
Just for our information?
Yep, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
So as far as timeline goes, we're in a public comment period right now with the public to say, are we doing it right? Are there other recommendations? We're going to come back to you on May 14th with a briefing that summarizes the public comments that we received at that point. And then the goal being legislative action on May 21st. And then hopefully we'll be able to submit to HUD on May 22nd. When I say hopefully, that means we don't have our funding commitment from HUD yet, so we can't submit that full report until we have that. So, but we should have that by the time we come to you in the 2nd, 3rd weeks of May. If not, that'll be part of the briefing. Keep you updated.
So any other questions or comments, we can talk to you about those before May 13th.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good. So, Scott, I see you've raised your hand.
Yeah, just 2 quick comments. One, as George mentioned earlier, the advisory committee is a recommending body. So the Board of County Commissioners has the final approval say on that. And then just kind of echoing the comments earlier, simplicity is really what the team strove for. We've heard a lot of the comments from providers about the complexity of multiple funding sources, multiple RFPs, different periods of time. So I'm hoping that what we believe and what the team believes as simplifying the process comes through from the providers themselves, and they see the same things and share the same comments back with us.
Well, thank you for all the hard work, and Kat explained, this is the best process she's seen. So thank you for that, and we'll look forward to getting the information here soon. So that way if we have questions before the 13th, we could be asking those questions.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, since we do have a quorum.
I have one executive session. Nothing else to go, then there's a
Yeah, I guess, are there any other miscellaneous matters, I guess, to come before us? Just double check.
Since we
Not for me.
Okay,
got 4.
I don't have anything.
okay. Okay,
You had a quorum before I got here.
just for a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. Okay.
You got that bit.
Oh, Pat, sorry.
I just wanted to recommend to the board a press release for tomorrow's homeward bound matter. And so I will prepare something for a quote from the chair, just an early heads up. Should have that by tomorrow morning.
Landing. Randy was just scratching his back.
oh no, I was scratching.
I saw that. Okay, so with that, then, you're not, Chris.
Yes, I have one matter under pending potential litigation pursuant to RCW 4231.10.1I. This matter should take about 15 minutes, no action from the board. Those present should be the board, myself, and Larry Haskell.
So just the commissioners, yourself and Larry,
Correct.
your present.
Yes.
I did have one question about, not related to today, but tomorrow. We're getting briefed on precinct boundary alterations, and then we have those also queued up for adoption tomorrow afternoon.
I think, yes, I think I asked Mike about it specifically.
Okay,
It's just has to do with like Deer Park,
okay,
the kind of some boundary changes with the Deer Park.
okay. Is it that, or are we splitting up precincts? Are we?
So
No, okay,
it seemed pretty simple when I
was,
asked.
okay,
So you may ask Mike
Yeah.
today.
Okay.
Before the briefing tomorrow.
will do.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just a question if Scott should be included in the executive session or no? Okay, perfect, thank you.
So, so then it is 11 o'clock. We'll go into executive session for 15 minutes. At the end of that 15 minutes, we will then adjourn for the day and see everybody back tomorrow morning. Thank you all.